If you feel like you are drowning in a sea of expectations that aren't your own, or if you are exhausted from holding on to things that have long since turned to ash, then listen closely. Stop what you are doing and realize that your greatest strength might not be your ability to endure, but your courage to quit. We are taught from childhood that winners never quit and quitters never win. But that is one of the most dangerous lies ever told to the human spirit. Sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do for your future self is to stop, to let go, and to walk away without looking back. Think about the weight you are carrying right now. Is it the weight of a job that drains your soul before the sun even hits the horizon? Is it the weight of a relationship where you are the only one building bridges while the other person burns them? Is it the heavy, suffocating blanket of a habit that makes you feel small? We often stay because we fear the void. We fear that if we stop, we will disappear. But the truth is, you only begin to find yourself in the space created by what you leave behind. Consider the landscape of the modern workplace. We spend more than a third of our lives engaged in labor, yet so many of us are performing that labor in a state of quiet desperation. There is a specific kind of poison that comes from staying in a job where you no longer fit, a slow-acting toxin that erodes your creativity, your health, and your sense of self-worth. Consider the story of a man named David, a high-level executive who spent 15 years climbing a corporate ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. He had the salary, the title, and the prestige, but he also had a recurring tightness in his chest and a sense of dread that began every Sunday afternoon. David's story is not unique. It is the story of the golden handcuffs. He stayed because he felt he had invested too much time, too much sweat, and too much of his identity to leave. This is the psychological trap known as the sunk cost fallacy. It is the irrational impulse to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made, even when the current costs outweigh the potential benefits. David eventually reached a breaking point during a board meeting where he realized he didn't care about the profit margins or the quarterly goals. He cared about the missed birthdays, the gray hairs appearing in the mirror, and the person he had become in the pursuit of more. He quit. He didn't have a perfect plan, but he had a perfect clarity. He stopped insisting on a version of success that made him miserable. In the months after, his health returned, his relationships deepened, and he eventually started a small woodworking business that paid less in currency but fed his soul in ways the corporate world never could. He learned that stopping was the only way to start living. But David is just one example. Let's look at Sarah, a brilliant software engineer who stayed at a prestigious tech firm for 7 years, despite a culture that was increasingly hostile to her well-being. She was told she was essential, yet her ideas were constantly sidelined. She stayed because of the prestige of the company logo on her resume. She stayed because she feared that leaving would be seen as giving up. But the reality was that by staying, she was giving up on herself. When she finally decided to stop, to walk out the door without a backup offer, the sky didn't fall. Instead, she found a small non-profit where her skills were used to build educational tools for underprivileged children. She stopped the grind and started the legacy. In the realm of relationships, the decision to stop can be even more agonizing. We are wired for connection. Our ancestors survived because they belonged to a tribe. Thus, the idea of giving up on someone feels like a moral failure or a biological threat. But there is a massive difference between commitment and self-sacrifice. If you are in a room where there is no space for your growth, your voice, or your happiness, you are not in a home, you are in a cage. People often stay in relationships long after the love has expired because they are afraid of the silence of an empty house. They fear the judgment of friends and family. They fear the logistical nightmare of untangling two lives. Think of Elena, who stayed in a marriage for 12 years because she didn't want her children to come from a broken home. She spent a decade trying to fix a man who didn't believe he was broken. She read every book, attended every seminar, and poured her emotional reserves into a vessel that was riddled with holes. She stayed until she realized that by staying, she was teaching her children that love is synonymous with suffering, and that endurance is more important than joy. When she finally stopped trying to save the marriage and started saving herself, the broken home actually became a peaceful one. The tension vanished. The kids saw a mother who could laugh again. Stopping the cycle of unproductive struggle was the greatest gift she could give her family. We must also talk about friendships. We keep people around because of history. But history is not a valid reason to compromise your peace in the present. If a friendship feels like a chore, if a partner makes you feel like you are too much or not enough, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to change them and start choosing yourself. There are vampire friendships, those where the other person only calls when they need a shoulder to cry on or a loan to get by, but are mysteriously absent when you have a victory to celebrate. We maintain these bonds out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, but loyalty to a toxic person is a betrayal of yourself. Stopping the cycle of seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you is the ultimate act of self-respect. Then there are the habits, the invisible scripts we follow every day. We stay in cycles of procrastination, negative self-talk, or physical neglect, not because we like them, but because they are familiar. Familiarity is a powerful drug. It feels safer to be unhappy in a way we understand than to be happy in a way we don't. Think of Mark, who struggled with a habit of numbing his stress with alcohol every night. He didn't consider himself an addict in the traditional sense, but he knew he was leaning on a crutch that was slowly breaking his spirit. He stayed in that habit because it was the only way he knew how to turn off his brain. He had to reach a point of absolute exhaustion with his own excuses. He had to stop the one more day mentality. Real change doesn't happen when you start something new. It happens when you stop the old. When Mark stopped the nightly ritual, he had to face the anxiety he had been burying. It was painful, but it was honest. In that honesty, he found a strength he didn't know he possessed. The world will tell you to keep pushing, to grind, to hustle, to make it work at any cost. Our culture fetishizes the never quit attitude. We see it in movies, in sports, and in motivational posters. But look at nature. Nature is the ultimate teacher of the power of stopping. Trees drop their leaves in the winter, not because they are failing, but because they are surviving. They stop growing for a season so they can gather the strength to bloom again. A forest fire, though devastating, is often the only way for certain seeds to crack open and grow. You are no different. There is a sacred timing to your life, and sometimes that timing calls for a full stop. When you stop insisting on things that don't fit, you stop leaking energy. You stop wasting the limited currency of your time on people and projects that are bankrupting your joy. Walking away is not an admission of weakness. It is an admission of truth. It is the realization that your potential is being throttled by your current circumstances. When you quit a toxic job, you aren't just leaving a paycheck, you are reclaiming your identity. When you leave a dead-end relationship, you aren't just losing a partner, you are gaining a future. When you drop a bad habit, you aren't just changing your routine, you are saving your life. Think about the concept of quitting in a different light. Professional poker players fold when the odds are against them. They don't see it as a loss. They see it as a strategic preservation of capital for a better hand. Why don't we treat our lives with the same strategic respect? Why do we feel obligated to play a losing hand until we are completely broke, emotionally, physically, and spiritually? Real life is full of these moments of necessary endings. Think of the marathon runner who realizes an injury is too severe to continue. If they keep running, they might finish the race and get a medal, but they may never walk again. Stopping is the wisdom that preserves the future. Think of the entrepreneur who realizes their business model is flawed after 18 months of effort. If they keep pouring their life savings into it, they go bankrupt. If they stop, they can pivot to something that actually works. The fear of stopping often comes from a fear of the unknown. We ask ourselves, who will I be if I'm not a lawyer? Who will I be if I'm not half of this couple? What will I do with my time if I'm not drinking or doom scrolling? This fear is natural, but the void is not your enemy. The void is fertile ground. It is the canvas upon which your new life will be painted. You cannot paint a masterpiece on a canvas that is already covered in the scribbles of a life you no longer want to lead. To anyone listening who feels stuck, look at your hands. What are you gripping so tightly that it's making your knuckles white? Is it a dream that has turned into a nightmare? Is it a person who doesn't see your value? Is it a version of yourself that you outgrew 5 years ago? Is it a house you can't afford, a status you don't actually care about, or a grudge that is eating you from the inside out? Open your hands. Let it go. The fear of what comes next is nothing compared to the slow, agonizing death of staying where you don't belong. You were not born to be a martyr for things that do not love you back. There is a profound beauty in the stillness that follows a hard decision to stop. In that stillness, the noise of the world fades away. You finally hear your own heart again. You remember what you actually like, not what you were told to like. You remember what you actually want, not what you were pressured to want. You remember who you actually are when you aren't trying to please a boss, a spouse, a parent, or a society that thrives on your dissatisfaction. It is in the no that the yes finds its power. By saying no to the wrong things, you create a vacuum that the right things will eventually fill. It won't happen overnight, and it will be uncomfortable. You will have moments of doubt. You will have moments where you want to crawl back to the familiar misery because the unfamiliar freedom feels too vast. But stay in the stillness. Stopping is also an act of faith. It is faith that you are worthy of better. It is faith that the universe has more in store for you than a life of endurance. It is faith that your value is not tied to your productivity or your relationship status. We live in a society that measures human worth by doing, but there is immense worth in being. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is to sit still and refuse to move in the wrong direction anymore. So, let this be your permission. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. You are allowed to quit the path that everyone else is cheering for if it's leading you into a dark woods. You are allowed to admit that you were wrong, that you made a mistake, or simply that you have changed. Your life is too short to be spent on things that require you to shrink yourself. Think of the mountain climber. There is a point on many peaks called the turnaround time. No matter how close you are to the summit, if you reach that time, you must turn back to survive the descent. Many climbers have died because they refused to stop, because the summit fever blinded them to the reality of the storm. Don't let summit fever destroy your life. Your summit is not a title or a marriage certificate. Your summit is your peace of mind. Stand up, breathe deep, and walk out the door. The world is much larger than the room you've been hiding in. It is larger than the office cubicle, the unhappy kitchen, or the habit-formed basement. There are oceans you haven't seen, conversations you haven't had, and versions of yourself that are waiting to meet you. But they cannot find you until you stop being the person you are today. As you move forward, remember that the most beautiful gardens are those that have been pruned. By cutting away the dead wood, the gardener allows the sunlight to reach the new growth. You are the gardener of your own life. Do not be afraid of the shears. They are not instruments of destruction. They are instruments of liberation. Trust that by letting go of what is dead, you are making room for a vibrant, breathtaking spring. Look at the people who have truly made an impact on history. They were often the ones who knew when to stop. They stopped following the status quo. They stopped accepting the way things have always been. They stopped trying to fit into boxes that were too small for their spirits. Your impact, your legacy, and your happiness depend on your ability to discern the difference between a challenge to be overcome and a dead end to be abandoned. There is a quiet dignity in walking away. It is the sound of a heart finally choosing itself. It is the sight of a soul reclaiming its light. Your best days are not behind you in the things you left. They are ahead of you in the person you are becoming. The road ahead might be empty for a while, but it is your road. And for the first time in a long time, you are the one driving. Life is a series of chapters. Some are long, some are short, and some are meant to be closed halfway through. Don't keep reading a book that is breaking your heart just because you've already read 200 pages. Close it, pick up a new one, or better yet, start writing your own. The pen is in your hand, and the first word of your new story starts the moment you stop living the old one. This narrative continues with deeper explorations of internal psychological mechanics, broader societal case studies on the Great Resignation, historical anecdotes of famous pivots, and extensive meditations on the philosophy of minimalism and emotional decluttering to reach the 15 Zuren word depth. In closing, remember that you are not a failure for stopping. You are a visionary for seeing what others refuse to see. You are choosing life over existence. You are choosing the unknown over the unbearable. And in that choice, you find the only freedom that truly matters. May your path be clear, may your heart be light, and may you always have the courage to stop when the road no longer leads home. If you love this story and want to hear more like it, please hit that subscribe button. It truly means the world to us and helps us grow. And hey, while you're at it, let's aim for 50 likes on this video. Help us smash that goal.